The new co-leader of the Greens. It's Chloe Swarbrick. Chloe, welcome.
Kia ora, how are you?
Yeah,
Kia ora,
bloody
Chloe.
marvellous, mate. How you doing?
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks, guys. It's been it's been a pretty surreal and quite weird time, to be honest. I still don't feel like it's necessarily sunken in, and part of that has probably got to do with the fact that Marama was unwell with COVID-19 on Sunday, so I felt like there was this Marama shaped hole next to me. But yeah, I feel pretty just deeply grounded, I guess, in the gratitude that I've been feeling. And, the kind of constant point that I've been making to everybody is the hope and the faith that folks have put into me. I hope that they feel that in themselves as well. And I hope that they feel that in our communities, because, we've got a lot of mahi to do when it comes to holding this government to account, as well as, God forbid, having some hope for a better vision for this country, because I think that that's the thing that always gets us, right? We spend so much time fighting what's in front of us and not thinking about the stuff that we can build.
Well, Chloe, I did a live stream last night with Paul Barlow. People know him on TikTok as Paul the Other One. He's one of our kin, our whānau out there doing good work. And we had a bit of a chat for about 10 minutes. He was talking to me about the media on his podcast. And he went, Pat, everyone's pretty depressed with this conversation. What is there to look forward to? And you know what I said? I said, Chloe Swarbrick.
Aww.
That is a bright light in our political discord at the moment to look forward to see what you can do and where you can go with this place. But the most important question for me is, now that you're co-leader of the Greens, does that mean you're kind of in charge of climate change, and can you do something about the weather in Dunedin?
All roads lead to Dunedin, right? I am actually in Dunners this coming weekend, and we're just actually arranging a bit of a public meeting, so we might see you there, Pat. But
yeah, definitely. We'll be there.
Yeah, cool. In terms of the climate change portfolio, look, it's no secret that it's something that I've obviously been really interested in for a long time. I sat on the Environment Select Committee between the 2017 to 2020 term when we were going through the Zero Carbon Act implementation, the establishment of the Independent Climate Change Commission, changes to the emissions trading scheme, which removed this thing called free allocation, which is basically corporate welfare, that the Nats froze free allocations for our most polluting industries. We can get into that if you want to. But I think that, we have a massive challenge in front of us with this government's, even just their stated agenda to pour oil and gas on the climate crisis fire. You've got Shane Jones heckling in the House every other week about how he wants to open coal mines on conservation land. And I know that he's just doing that goading, baiting thing that has kind of served him well over his political career. But we're talking about kind of the scientific non-negotiables that are necessary for life on Earth as we know it. So I kind of do take it quite seriously. So you will see as our kind of portfolio reshuffle is announced, that things will fall into place there.
We were saying last year when, of course, when will Chloe be the next Prime Minister? When will Chloe be next leader of the Greens? Yada, 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 yada. Me and Chewy were pondering, and I'd like to get your take on this. We were wondering if the way you've operated amongst the Greens, we've kind of seen you sort of as a roving sniper. Like you can get in and you can take apart and you can do the research and you can just move as you want. And we wondered, could the co-leadership actually hamper that a bit? Will it be harder because you'll have more responsibility now and you'll have more roles to play and more things? Is there a chance that this might take you away from some of that debate, or do you see it as no hindrance at all?
Yeah, that's a really interesting hypothesis, and it kind of, funnily enough, aligns with another title that I got on another podcast, which was Young Vet. Some guys are saying that, I've been around, I'm now, I turned 30 in June, and, I've got 6 years of experience in politics, more than our Prime Minister, I might add. Yeah. So it's quite, just a funny thing to point out. I have kind of operated, obviously, as you've kind of just pointed out, within my portfolio responsibilities. So most kind of recently in the lead up to the 2023 election, I'm really kind of leaning into my revenue portfolio and really making the tax debate one that I think that is getting the spotlight that it deserves, because all roads really do lead back to tax, and the cooked tax system that we've got here, it's working as it is designed to work, which we'll see, the wealthiest people in this country pay an effective tax rate less than half of that of the average New Zealander. We talk about that in the chamber, and we're getting heckled by the ACT and National and New Zealand First parties who are saying, those people are hardworking. And I'm like, well, say that to the average New Zealander who's paying double the tax rate, effectively, of those who are at the top. But nonetheless, that aside, to your point of how I guess I'll operate in this, I see it as an opportunity to just kind of level up and get, the privilege of a larger platform to just kind of hold a mirror out to society. One of the things that's been obviously immensely flattering, and you've kind of alluded to it just there, Pat, around kind of people putting a lot of hope in me on the horizon. But I don't think that change happens just because one person at the top says that that's the way that things have to happen. I mean, if you look back at history, including here in Aotearoa in New Zealand, it wasn't because there was one person who said that that's what had to happen. It was because tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of New Zealanders mobilised to hold the government and those in power to account and to make that happen, to build a political movement for that change. So I guess I see my role more as the great cheerleader to have people across this country realise that politicians work for them, not the other way around. And politicians need the public far more than the public need politicians. And the standard of debate has just been depressing the entire time that I've been in Parliament. Like, I've also made no secret of the fact that, no one really knows what they're doing. This is the funniest thing I think about growing up. When you're a kid, you look around at the world and you go, well, the adults must have a clue. They must know what's going on. And then you grow up and you realise the parents were making it up and doing the best that they could with the resources available to them and the education life experience that they had or otherwise. And I got to say, my experience in Parliament is very much the same. I've been very quickly accustomed to the fact that a lot of things are made up on the fly and, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But I think what differentiates us in the Greens is not only that we're upfront and honest about that, but also that we're doing it, for the right reasons as far as our values go, to put kind of compassion, people and planet first and foremost, but also that we seek to do that on a really robust platform of evidence. And that's just been one of the most aggravating things about this government in the last few months is this pretense, this Orwellian discourse around their focus on data and evidence as is baked into their coalition agreements. Yet their own advice consistently says in many of the pieces of legislation that they've passed through under urgency that what they're doing is demonstrably going to make the country a worse place. And they've said straight up to New Zealanders that they don't care. And I frankly think that's despicable and appalling. So, yeah, it's my job to keep reminding people of that and that they don't have to put up with it.
Yeah. Chewy, jump in, mate.
I think the reason that Shane Jones is so dismissive of your criticism is, let's be brutally honest, he's not going to have to live with any of the consequences. He'll be clocking out well before that bill's due to be paid.
Well, funny enough, Joey, this is actually something that, so you might remember a moment where I used a 2-word phrase that I learned from my little brother in response to heckling about my age to Todd Muller in the middle of a climate change speech. And what I was actually talking about was the fact that, in 2050, which is the time horizon for the Zero Carbon Act, I'll be 56 years old because I was born in 1994. And the kids who were on the street at that point in time marching to try and get the government to do more on climate action couldn't even vote, couldn't even participate in our political system. The average age in Parliament at that point was around 50 years old. So I just find a lot of the debate and discussion around lowering the voting age and, this kind of quite patronising tone that a lot of politicians take that young people don't know what they're talking about, just completely removed from reality, because actually we could make an argument, a straw man argument, and not a legitimate one that I am trying to meaningfully pose just for sake of all of those caveats and red flags in case anyone takes this out of context. But there's just as equally, I think, a case to be made for capping the voting age. Anyway.
Yeah. Hey,
I mean, the argument for that is democracy is not harmed by adding more people to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what you're going to do differently, if anything, to try and grow that progressive left position or number of MPs in Parliament, if not in government. What do you, coming in, a fresh voice into the leadership area, do differently to see the numbers get even bigger than they are now?
So what I'm really clear about is that I'm going to spend the next few weeks and months and years finding, identifying, and shoulder tapping local champions everywhere across this country who I think need to be in our House of Parliament and who embody Green Party values to run really serious local campaigns to inspire and mobilise people such that we then end up translating that to seats at every single level of government. So I'm not just talking about obviously the general election and, those 120 odd seats in Parliament, but also in councils around this country as well. Because I think a lot of people also, as is also reflected in lower voting rates and turnout at local body election, don't necessarily realise that oftentimes the immediate stuff that impacts your daily life happens at a local government level as well. So for me, it's really as simple as that. I mean, Pat, Joey, if you want to talk to me about how we changed the world, how we won Auckland Central against a red wave and a blue wave, how we make history, how human beings have always organised, it starts with something as simple as conversations. And that is real time consuming, but it's the real stuff that builds sustainable movements.
Yeah, tell us about it. Conversation.
as you know, as you're doing.
Let's have a look, because you're talking about tax. Now, I'm not going to play the story for you, but you were talking on News Hub this morning with some young politician called David Seymour. I think he's French. I haven't met him yet. We'll have to see what he does.
French Canadian, isn't it?
I think so. Oh, he's Canadian. That's right. He's Canadian.
Oh, yes.
Accent real well. And you talked about there being $1 billion because of their money that they're giving back to landlords through tax breaks, tax cuts, and reimbursing interest. News Hub tonight has reported that they've looked at the books and they've had it approved that it's $800 million out of the budgeted amount that National and ACT said this would cost. So they're out by nearly $1 billion, as it's saying on News Hub tonight. I just want to throw you the ball and let you speak to that, because what we see as the Jimmy Nobodies who don't know anything, who aren't journalists at all, is we see a bunch of promises made by this government, and just, whether it's the international tax on house sales falling over, or all these things that they said, yes, our numbers are good, we've done it, and we've got fat in there in case something goes wrong, just falling over and falling over and falling over, yet they still seem to be able to afford their tax cuts. And we're wondering why and how, and would love you to speak to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, firstly, good on News Hub for breaking this news. I just also want to reflect on the fact that I'm utterly devastated for the loss of that channel and a lot of the journalists in that space. Like, love them or hate them. And I know that all journalists and all different platforms get a lot of hate mail, much like politicians do. The diversity of voices and platforms is incredibly important for democratic accountability and for the function of our society. A functional, flourishing fourth estate is necessary to hold politicians to account. So I'm really worried about what's going to happen with the kind of, removal of some of those journos, and also what's happening at TVNZ and the cuts at Renews as well. So I'm really hoping, and this is just the final point on this, that Melissa Lee, who's the Minister of Broadcasting, actually tries to reach a cross-partisan agreement on this, because the last thing that we need is for all the more kind of overt and explicit politicisation of public interest journalism funding. It's just fundamental for our democracy to work and for faith and trust in our institutions. So to the point around kind of their forecasts, look, the numbers were always made up, and you had, renowned economists like Craig Rennie, who was also in that story tonight from the CTU, who was making it abundantly clear that it was cookery. And it was just wild seeing, the now Prime Minister throughout the campaign saying everything was watertight, everything was watertight. That's the leader of the same National Party who opposed the Green Party's proposal to establish an independent parliamentary budget costings unit, which would cost all political parties election promises, such that we had a kind of baseline agreement about how things worked, and we could therefore have a more evidence-based debate and discussion, God forbid, during our general elections. So, it's evident that blowout was always going to happen in some way or another. The second thing is I'd make the point around choices. As you just kind of alluded to, Pat, this is now forecasted to be a $2.9 billion policy to implement over the next 4 years. That is $2.9 billion that is not going to be spent on other things like the crumbling public infrastructure around us. I was also on AM talking about the pink concert and the fact that, folks were not able to get functional public transport in and out of that. It's frankly embarrassing. We call ourselves a world-class city. This is, where a third of the population live, and we can't properly invest in getting people around it. It costs us billions of dollars in productivity costs if you're solely to look at it from a right-wing kind of perspective, not to mention the healthcare and mental health kind of impacts of that kind of stuff. And then the climate and environmental ones too. So at that point around choices, this government is making an explicit choice to hand over, during what they are calling a cost of living crisis, $2.9 billion to those who evidently sit at the kind of further to the top end of town, those who own assets and are able to rent them out and to borrow against them and otherwise. The argument that I have also heard made around how this is somehow going to be passed on to renters is just economic ridiculousness. And you'll get tons of independent economists that can say this, but Shamubeel Yaqub is a good one to kind of look to on this, who has made the point that we're not looking at pass-through costs here. At a point in time when we had a few years ago, prior to COVID-19, among historically low mortgage rates, we didn't see that passed along to renters. We then had historically higher rental costs as well. So the only way that we are going to meaningfully be able to get rents down is either obviously through kind of the classical market economics ways of getting more supply on stream, but also through policies that have worked massively overseas, the likes of rent controls, which we already have in some form through the Residential Tenancies Act, which prescribe that you can't raise rents more than market rate. The problem is that that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because who sets market rate but the landlords? And just the final point around the kind of choices, right, is, I have sat through that kind of, as I was talking about, just this Orwellian nonsense in Parliament, as is all of our amazing new Green team, our largest ever Green Party caucus over the last few months, is this government's just rammed through things without adequate public scrutiny or input, and just complete disregard for the usual conventions and protocols, and said that the reason that they're doing that is because they won the election, so apparently we can just revert to authoritarian rule as a result of that. But they also didn't campaign on things like reversing the smoke-free generation policies, which, mean demonstrably, again, and their evidence shows, is going to result in more people smoking for longer and therefore more people dying, because this is a product which kills half of its consumers. That will give them a revenue boost of approximately $500 million per year. The trade-off there is more New Zealanders dying so that the government can have $500 million, which helps to pay for things like their tax cuts for landlords. They also are doing things like seeking to steal school kids' lunch money. They also have cut $1 billion from walking and cycling and public transport. The list goes on. And we are just, I think, in this really bizarre situation where we're 40 years on now in 2024 from 1994, yet all of this, 1984 rather, where all of this is just straight from the Rogernomics playbook. We're back in a trickle-down kind of war as peace world, but we have 40 years of evidence to show that it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Hey, our time with you is up. Do you have time for one more quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because as we're sitting here, I'm thinking about people like Jeanette Fitzsimons and Rod Donald and Sue Bradford. And it's unchallengeable that someone like yourself is standing on the shoulders of giants. What I'd like to know from you is, what do you see when you stand on those shoulders?
Thank you for a really deep and existential question, my friend.
You have 30 seconds. Is that enough?
Yeah. I thought you said this wasn't magazine style. What I see and what I feel, kind of the weight of occupying the privilege of a position like this, especially alongside somebody who just so deeply inspires me, is Marama Davidson. And Mara and I were actually thinking about the fact and talking about it over the last few days, that we actually have a pretty similar and quite complementary approach to how we do politics, and that we're super comfortable, on the streets with people rallying and organizing, as we are in the halls of power, kind of holding those in power to account. And I see in the whakapapa of the Green movement, and with legends like those leaders that you've cited, and Russell and Metiria and James as well, a whole number of people who have led amazing caucuses and the Green Party movement, through incredibly tumultuous times while being able to retain this uncanny ability to speak truth to power and to continue to uphold the same kaupapa. We have been consistent for 30 odd years, and it's quite funny that we're bleating on about the same thing, 30 years later. But I think the time has come, and I think that New Zealanders, in the main, kind of wrapping their head around the fact that the system that we've got, this kind of mind-numbing exploitation of people and the planet for its own sake, to kind of continue speeding things up so the squiggly line of GDP can go up. Meanwhile, homelessness and environmental degradation and the state of our hospital systems go down. People know that it's not working. So I think that, to your earlier question, right now I see on the horizon the opportunity for the first ever Green-led government, and that's what I'm going to be working towards every single day.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Hey, thank you for joining us. Make sure Jordan lets us know about the meeting you guys are coming down to, because we'll totally come along to it. I'd love to come and hear you guys.
I think it's happening on Sunday or Monday, so I'll let you know when I find that one out.
Yeah,
awesome. Hey, thanks so much, guys, and Paul Maria to everyone who's following along. Lots of love. It's a weird time, but I think together we got this.
And I like it that you said I mentioned a 2-word saying, but you never actually said "Okay, Boomer." We'll just
I've been trying to let that one kind of just drift off into the distance for 5 odd years, but they still managed to pull it out in all the 6 p.m. news slots yesterday.
Excellent. Hey, Chloe, thanks for your time, mate. And again, congratulations on the position. Well deserved and the right person.
Ngā mihi. I appreciate
Absolutely.
that. We'll catch you later, guys.